Well, they like to confuse people by saying that no government has ever spent more than they have, which of course is true. Unfortunately, no government has ever spent less per person.
Welcome back to Closer Look with Michael Friscolanti. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Derek Turner here as always. Okay, Minister Calandra back at it. Magic number is now seven school boards.
7. What was it? The Peel,
on the naughty list.
The Peel District School Board.
Peel and then somebody else.
And he's threatening the York Catholic District School Board, I believe. Yeah. Is taking no prisoners the right term? They passed that law in the fall that allowed them to act quicker on taking over schools, and they've used it now. This is two times now. So there's 7 in total, but 2 since the law passed. And we still don't know the answer of the school trustee question that we've talked about on this show. Calandra has hinted that he's not a huge fan of school trustees and wonders if we need them at all. And if this is the future of government control over local school boards.
2 topics that have kind of dominated our space in the last several weeks. Education, obviously one of them. The other being healthcare.
Yes, and we talked a lot about hospitals lately.
We do, yeah. Well, they're important.
Yeah, they are. And we there's always different angles to this story that we've talked about healthcare on this show.
Yes.
We were just talking about World Cup preparations with Dr. Varner, the emergency room physician in Toronto, which was a fascinating conversation. And what really about that spoke to the fact that hospitals are always kind of teetering on the edge.
Yeah.
And imagine if there was some kind of mass casualty event. Right now, the big discussion is hospital funding.
Right.
The Ontario Hospital Association came out last week, I believe, saying that they need $1 billion injection just to keep dealing with what they're dealing with, that they're dipping into their reserves, that things aren't very good, and they want predictable funding. They're asking for predictable funding, right? Now you have hospital unions coming out saying we actually need a $3.2 billion injection into the hospital system and 50,000 new healthcare workers in the hospitals just to get us up to the rate that other provinces are at. A lot of back and forth that the Ford government says that's misguided, that that's not true, and that they've funded healthcare more than any other government has in the past. So there's all kinds of numbers, all kinds of spin being thrown out there and a lot of deflection. And the reality is it's patients that are impacted by this.
Of course.
And so big decisions to be made. We talk a lot about, loving the public healthcare system we have and that Ontario has the best healthcare system in the world. And then when you actually dig into the numbers, maybe there's another story there to be told. So we're going to talk to Michael Hurley today, who's the president of the Hospital Union?
Ontario Council of Hospital Unions.
Yes, and this is their report they put out saying that the Ford government should fund an additional 48,249 full-time hospital staff immediately and inject more than $3 billion into the system. So they have a much different view, even more so than the Ontario Hospital Association. He's a busy guy. He's been going across the province, different press conference stuff, and he's agreed to join us tonight. So it should be a good conversation.
Ontario's hospitals are already overflowing with patients in hallways. Surgeries are being delayed, and staff are burning out. Now a new report says the system isn't just strained, it's falling dangerously behind. Hospital worker unions say Ontario is short nearly 50,000 healthcare workers and billions in funding just to keep pace with hospitals in other provinces. The Ford government insists it's making record investments, so who's right? And what happens to patients if nothing changes? Joining us tonight is Michael Hurley, the president of the Ontario Council of Hospital Unions. Michael, welcome to Closer Look. We certainly appreciate your time this evening.
I'm very grateful that you had me.
All right, Michael, the report says Ontario needs nearly 50,000 more hospital staff just to match other provinces. So for viewers and listeners, can you kind of put that into perspective for us? What does that shortage look like on a random day in any Ontario hospital?
Well, you've got this crisis in the hospitals caused by the lack of capacity and understaffing that leaves about 75,000 patients on waiting lists, waiting for surgeries beyond the medically recommended time limits for those procedures. And on any given day, you've got over 2,000 people on stretchers who don't have a bed to go to in the hospital. And what the public experiences typically are inordinately long wait times in the emergency departments. They wait for call bells to be answered. They directly experience the impact of the staff shortages, which are significant compared to all of the other provinces in Canada. We're at the very bottom in terms of the number of staff that we have in our public hospitals.
So I guess here's the disconnect, Michael. The government says it's spending a record $91.5 billion on healthcare. You say the hospitals are still running massive deficits. How can both things be true at the same time?
Well, I mean, the Ontario government spends less per capita than does any other provincial government in the country. And in fact, nobody has fewer staff or beds than we do. And we also are at the bottom of the OECD in terms of bed capacity and staffing. So on the one hand, it is true that the Ford government spends more on hospitals than any other government ever has. But actually, they're spending less per person, ironically, than, for example, the Wynne government did. And the Financial Accountability Office, based on the Ontario government's budget plan, is predicting that there will be the closure of 2,500 acute care beds over the next 3 years and the loss of about 7,500 nurses, 1,800 or so personal support workers, as hospitals deal with the fact that although their costs are going up by something like 6% a year, the government is only funding them at just over 2% for this year. And so they're cutting everywhere. Yeah.
So can you help us understand then, Michael? So what's the difference between how, say, the Liberal governments of the McGuinty and Wynne era funded hospitals to how the Ford government's funding them?
Well, they were more generous, actually. And the phenomenon that we have with the Ford government is, not only do they underfund the hospitals, but they don't tell them until the end of a given budget year whether or not they're going to make an increase. Like, for example, the hospitals have been told in the accounts that the hospital spending will decline by $500,000 in this budget year. Now, they've also been told to prepare budgets based on 2% for each of the next 3 years, even though their funding's going up by 6%. If the government makes a correction for 2025's budget year, it makes it so late in the year that the impact is unfortunately not very significant for the hospitals. And by that time, they've already done a fair bit of chopping of staff and services. So in former years, we had more predictable funding. They would tell the hospitals, a couple of years anyway, ahead what they could expect. Here, all they're told to plan for is a 3-year cut to their budgets, and it's not a way to operate a system which is designed to intervene on an emergent basis for people whose personal health is in often an acute crisis.
I believe the Ontario Hospital Association pointed to this concern as well. They're looking for predictable funding, right? Something they can know what it's going to be a few years out. You're calling for the same thing, Michael?
Yes, absolutely.
Can you speak to that?
Well, I mean, how can the hospitals deal with the fact that the province's population is growing and aging on the one hand? Like, knowing that, you would know that you should plan for an increased number of surgical procedures, for example, 2 years out, 3 years out. You can predict based on what we know about the demographics in the province, where additional resources would need to be added in the hospital sector. But of course, the hospitals can't do that because this government keeps them focused on the immediate challenge of how they're going to cut in this year, for example, 3.6% from their budgets. And so they can't plan for growth in population. They can't plan to meet the needs of an aging population, which, as you know, as people age, they demand more hospital services. They can't do any of that. They're completely focused on budget cutting, and they're not focused on meeting the health needs of the community. They're not allowed the privilege of doing that, and everyone suffers as a result.
Michael, the Health Minister's office called your claims misguided. What's the biggest fact that they're getting wrong or avoiding in this debate?
Well, they like to confuse people by saying that no government has ever spent more than they have, which of course is true. Unfortunately, no government has ever spent less per person on hospital care either, and no government has ever overseen, such a threadbare, understaffed operation in the hospitals as this one. It's a bit of there's a propaganda war waged by the government to confuse people and obfuscate what's really going on. And what's really going on is a lot of suffering for individuals who are waiting for care.
Because we hear this a lot, right? We talked about this in the past. The thing people struggle with is hearing people say, we have the best healthcare system in the world. Ontario is the state of the art. We do everything the best. But the reality in the inside of the hospital is much different, right, Michael? We see the ER situation is exhibit A of that, right? Emergency rooms across the province, I believe, are the worst shape they've ever been. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I mean they are generally completely unable to deliver the wait time standard. I've been, Kingston, the average wait in the ER is 27 hours. That's what it is in Peterborough. Imagine 27 hours to be seen in the emergency department. And what do we see in the emergency departments? Well, in North Bay, for example, we see big cuts happening, layoffs announced of staff in the emergency department. Now, tell me, who would cut staff in the emergency department?
Yeah.
Like, obviously, just based on hearsay and anecdotal information all of us possess, it's a dreadfully long wait for people already. What government would tolerate that? What government would encourage that?
And the worst outcome we've seen, right? I'm sure you've heard of the case of Finley Vanderwerk and a young 16-year-old boy from Oakville or from Burlington who died at the Oakville Hospital after waiting more than 8 hours for care. Was that kind of expected, as tragically as it is, to see these kind of cases, Michael? The worse the situation gets.
I mean, I don't want to sensationalize, but a lot of people give up. They just leave the ER. A lot of people are overlooked or ignored. And unfortunately for some people, the consequences of that are tragic. And, the staff, I believe with all my heart, are working as conscientiously and as efficiently and as purposefully as they possibly can. But given the volume of people who are there seeking care, people fall through the cracks. Like, it just happens. That's what happens when you have understaffing. That's why the medical error rate goes up so significantly. It just happens. It's well documented scientifically. So this personal tragedy, I'm sure, is replicated, and we often just don't hear about it.
What do you say to people, Michael, who they hear the number? I think your organization is calling for a $3.2 billion annual investment in the hospital system, who say, the government has a lot of balls in the air that they have to juggle, right? Healthcare is one of them, but there's other things. And people who say, that's just not possible in the current financial situation to put that much into it. What do you say? What's your argument back to those people?
Well, I mean, we have this phenomenon, which we share with, many other nations, that we have the baby boom generation aging out, and as it ages out, it's demanding more and more care. And we have a choice to make. I mean, when the baby boom generation came on stream, we built schools, then we built universities. We met the needs there. Now we have the baby boom generation aging, and the moral question for society is: are we going to meet the healthcare needs of this generation, or are we going to effectively turn our back on them and engage in some budget cutting exercise? If we're actually going to meet the needs of this age cohort, then we're going to have to make an investment to drag up our capacity, because otherwise they won't get the care they need, and they should. They should. And when they're gone, when people like me are gone, the demands on the system and the costs will fall, just like they've fallen now, in education as a result of, the population shifts.
Michael, just back to what you said a few moments ago about the warnings from the Financial Accountability Office and what things could look like a couple of years down the road. Can you give us a specific example of how bad things are getting?
How bad things are getting? Well, I mean, the worst thing I heard this week was in Hamilton, where, having announced with much fanfare the opening of an additional 4 neonatal intensive care unit beds, they've just canceled them. And, so far in this process, the big impact of the government's cost cutting has been felt primarily by seniors, older people, because they tend to use the healthcare system more. Now we're talking about closing life-saving beds that are urgently needed for, newborns. And like, doesn't that make you mad? I am really distressed by that personally. That's the worst I've heard this week.
I'm sure every week there's a different example, Michael. We appreciate all the time. Just a couple more questions. Do you actually get FaceTime with the health minister? Do you get to ever speak to her?
No, one characteristic of this government is that not only do we not get meetings, they don't even return our mail. Like if we write them, they don't even respond.
We've noticed the same, Michael.
And it's, I get that they don't like unions. I get that, except that we represent the people who, these are very hardworking people who are compassionate and loving and highly skilled, and they're working their hearts out for the people of Ontario. And when they raise an issue like violence or the lack of masks during a COVID crisis or whatever the issue might be, you might think we would get at least the respect of a thank you very much for your letter. But no, this government isn't big on consultation with some of us. So I regret to say, yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to say, what did you say to her when you talked to her? But obviously, you don't get that opportunity to speak to her. So I want to ask that question. Just another question, just about how you guys are calling for nearly 50,000 more hospital staff to be brought in the province. Is that just a question of money, Michael, or how could we actually train and equip hospitals quickly with that many workers?
Well, you'd have to ramp up for it, but I think you can see in Quebec some examples of a provincial government which set targets, for example, for personal support workers. And, they said that they wanted to train and hire 10,000, and they did it by offering them, their salary to go to school and paying their tuition with a commitment to stay. Mm-hmm. And they pretty much met the targets. And, when you think about how we treat police trainees versus nurses trainees, you see a willingness on society's part to pay salaries for police cadets, and that's good. That's good. But the same willingness should be there for nurse trainees or PSW trainees, I would argue, because if we train them up, we're going to have to do it to a large extent based on recruiting people in Ontario, not just robbing other countries of their healthcare workers, which is one of the things we're doing. But we also need to create the capacity inside Ontario. And I think we can do that if the government would put its mind to it.
All right. There's Michael Hurley, the president of the Ontario Council of Hospital Unions. Michael, appreciate your time tonight.
I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Go to Michael to squeeze us in. I know he was tight for time today. It makes you wonder. It feels like almost Groundhog Day, right? We're always having this conversation about healthcare issues, and it makes you wonder, is that problem ever going to go away?
Oh, yeah, it feels like we'll be talking about this for generations. But it was interesting because Dr. Varner was just on the show, the emergency room physician, to talk about her editorial in the Canadian Medical Association Journal. And she revealed a lot, too, that maybe a lot of people don't think about, just about how we're kind of always on the edge of something going wrong. Like if there was any big mass casualty event at a hospital, there'd be some trouble dealing with it.
Yeah, it's like a house of cards.
A house of cards, right? And it shows with numbers and government and unions. They all throw out different numbers and they say, well, it's the most we fund healthcare more than anyone ever has. And he's saying, well, but it's actually, if you look at it per person, it's actually less. All I'll say is what we say all the time is I don't envy the people who do that for a living, and I'm in awe of the stuff they do. Doctors,
Absolutely.
nurses, all healthcare workers. My thing would be you try to make decisions that make sure that they can do their job the best they can because they do amazing work.
They absolutely do. Very well said. Okay. Very cold day across the province. Let's get out of here, go home and throw another log on the fire and warm up a little bit. For Derek Turner, executive producer of the program, Michael Friscolanti, our editor-in-chief, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for watching. Stay warm. See you tomorrow night, Friday edition of Closer Look.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.